Hello everybody, it's George from Ireland, so welcome back to my channel. So in this video I'm going to ask, is Russia winning the war in Ukraine? Because they seem to have finally sorted it out, arrived at a sensible strategy that is slowly but surely working, gaining perhaps a kilometre a day, squeezing the Ukrainians out. There's a vice-like grip around Severodonetsk, and the Ukrainians have openly said now they're going to have to evacuate. Perhaps a bit of a mistake to give the plan away. If the Russians thought, oh, the Ukrainians are going to defend it, and Russians would behave differently. But I think you can see this. I mean, these days with satellites, and the Russians have satellites, you can't hide significant scale troop movements, evacuate the civilians. I hope they've evacuated a lot before, because any civilians who are left behind the Severodonetsk will either be murdered, we've seen this before, on a large scale, many times, by the Russian army, or kidnapped, sent to Siberia, possibly into slave labor. So it really is a throwback to Stalinism. It's horrific. Incidentally, nothing in this video is remotely Russophobic. I'm not anti-Russian. The Russians are very good people. I've had Russian girlfriends and so on. So there's a lot to admire in Russian culture and so on. They're good and bad people of every nationality. But unfortunately, Russia is led by a homicidal maniac at the moment, who is just bereft of any common decency, of any moral standards, who's utterly mendacious. And I know everybody's a liar, except me. Okay, that's a lie. But I mean, politicians generally are liars. But Putin's one of those who's off the scale, who argue that up is down, and so on. People will never. There's no accountability for crimes against enemy civilians in Russia. But so the campaign in that Donbass region appears to be going reasonably well for Russia. This inexorable advance. But it reminds me of what a British general said in the First World War. Can we really afford to go on paying this sort of price for this sort of gain? If to go forward, 1 kilometre, the Russians have to suffer like 100 deaths or something, and they've got about 600 kilometres to go to the Polish border. Can they afford to do that? And bear in mind, they're advancing in one bit of Luhansk region. A further north and further south, they're not moving further forward. And the Ukrainians can start to retake this. So the Russians maybe finally ironed out some of the logistical problems. On the other hand, they virtually exhausted their supply of guided missiles and so on, which are very expensive, which cost something like 4 million a pop. And so you'd want to use them quite carefully, especially as you can't manufacture them that fast. And they often rely on Western electronic components, which obviously not going to be sold anymore. Maybe they can get ersatz Chinese ones that might fit these missiles. I mean, I'm no technician, so I can't tell you. Although there is some headway for the Russian army, well, it's about time. You'd expect when they had all these serious advantages, they would make progress. The problem is NATO countries not providing enough sophisticated weaponry, long-range weaponry, because these things which are person portable, these javelins and so on, to take out a tank, and you have to be within like 800 meters of the tank to do that. Those are all right. Well, how about the long-range weapons? What if the Russians are quite far away, or 20 kilometers away or more, and the Ukrainians just don't have enough artillery? So they need a lot more of that, and be able to take out the bridges and the tunnels through which Russian trucks and trains are coming to supply troops, bring up reinforcements, even take away the wounded or whatever it is. And that bridge across the Kerch Strait connecting Crimea to Russia, I'm astonished they haven't done that. And the Ukrainians have made some quite basic errors. I know we've been applauding their gallantry. It's not to say there's no bravery on the Russian side. By the way, you can be evil and brave. You could be a valiant person and murder civilians on purpose. Yeah, you could be a cowardly person and compassionate, have no physical courage, but not want to harm anyone. Indeed, want to help them. So these things are not necessarily opposites. And of course, I'm not so partisan and naive to think that nobody on the Ukrainian side has ever done anything wrong or is always a lovely person, because it's not that straightforward. The truth is untidy. Anyway, so the Western countries are just too reluctant to supply weapons. There's hesitancy in Germany about even providing tanks, which is quite shocking. Olaf Scholz, the German chancellor, the kind of prime minister, saying, well, can you necessarily defeat violence with violence? And, shouldn't we give peace a chance? I mean, which is really just nauseating. Okay, this posing as a noble sentiment, this virtue signaling, right? There's a war already on. What do you want the Ukrainians to just roll over and just accept it? That won't save them. We know that they'll get massacred. So, yes, you have to fight force with force. Putin, he's not going to be dissuaded by peaceful protests. You can see what is peaceful protests in his country. We already have sanctions, persuasion, appealing to his better nature. He has no conscience. International law, none of that is going to work with him at all. So it has to be armed force. You've got to make the price so high, he concludes it's not worth it. Think that actually he's risking his regime by persisting in this brutal and bloody invasion. I say that, I mean, obviously invasions necessarily kill people, but there's often gratuitous violence, killing far more people than they would even need to do to achieve his goals, and not just killing military personnel, killing civilians on a huge scale, on purpose, is no accident when it happens again and again and again. And the international community is telling him exactly what his troops are doing, giving him chapter and verse, giving him irrefragable ocular proof of it, and he'll persist, and he never bring his own troops to book for the depredations they visited upon the long-suffering civil population of Ukraine. So although it's going quite well for Russia, some of those new heavy weapons are going to get to Ukraine, and they would have been trained in other things that just take a few hours training, like some of the light anti-tank weapons, which can be carried by a person. You see, I'm very PC, don't say by a man. But there are other things which are rather more advanced and take weeks to train on, months to train on if you're going to give them fighter jets. And they've just been given MiGs by, the Slovaks, the Bulgarians, the Poles, things they already know how to fly. The more advanced fighter jets, you'd want to train people on those for months because they cost tens of millions of pounds. So you don't want somebody crashing those. Anyway, so, there's a semblance of normalcy has returned to Kiev, but there's still this fighting in the east. And Putin's strategy is already paying dividends. The Italians, they put forward a peace plan. This proposition was poo-pooed by Sergei Lavrov, saying he hadn't even received an official copy of it, which shows that the Russians are a little bit more confident in their position now. And, Germany and France saying, well, it has to be a diplomatic solution. So Putin is right. The West is going wobbly. They are caitiffs. So what can stiffen the spine of the European Union and other NATO countries? And we see that Putin, is deliberately causing famine in countries like Ethiopia, Eritrea, Somalia, Egypt, with which he has quite a cordial relationship, Bangladesh, jacking up food prices. So some of these countries, most people spend 50% of their income on food. If food goes up by 10%, there are riots in the streets because people are on the breadline as it is. That will push them from malnutrition into starvation in many cases. Millions of people who are not even Ukrainian. So Putin could easily say, okay, I promise safe passage to ships shipping grain or wheat or whatever out of Ukraine or something. Maybe Ukraine could agree not to make a profit out of it. No, he's not going to do that because he's going to hold the world to ransom. Tens of millions of people are going to have to plead Ukraine, just end the war, just surrender, do whatever it takes to undermine Ukraine. The war will end, Russia will win, so then the wheat, grain, and whatever else, the cooking oil, can flow out of there. But Russia obviously is having problems. 150 men of the National Guard, they were dismissed the other day for refusing to go and fight in Ukraine. They came up with a rather legalistic, though ingenious argument, that they couldn't go to Ukraine because that was crossing an international border and they didn't have passports. Because remember, even Russia recognizes Ukraine as a sovereign country. So they couldn't be convicted, but they were kicked out of it. The Rosgvardia, as in the Russia Guard, is something he created in 2015 as this paramilitary force. They're sort of quasi-soldiers, but they function as police, but they're sent to fight. So he is having manpower problems, difficulty rotating units, sending raw recruits, people wet behind the ears in their depots, into units that they don't fit in very well. So there are still problems. They are making progress, but I think that might grind to a halt because they will have just used up so much ammunition. They got fairly heavy losses. They have come up with a wise strategy, not being overambitious, just bite and hold small chunks, bit by bit by bit, wearing the Ukrainians down with a war of attrition. So for the Ukrainians to regain the initiative, they need more and heavier weapons. As the Ukrainian supply lines get shorter, the Russian ones get longer. The Russians have finally started targeting Ukrainian supply lines, and the Ukrainians they made some basic errors as well, just not blowing up bridges behind them and stuff like that. They could have mined things a bit more. And yes, you can clear mines, but it takes time, and it might have clear mines whilst under fire and so on. So you can get through virtually any defense. It just how long is it going to take you to get through that defense? Anyway, so it's scintillating. I'm watching this war, so it's going to go on for a long time. I mean, several months. I'll be surprised if the war ends this year. So you see how dead wrong I was. I mean, I don't think anyone at the beginning said it was going to be carrying on now into its 4th month, but their comment is that it go on for several years. In a sense, it's already been going on for 8 years since Putin, his invasion of Crimea, invasion of Luhansk and Donbass, where he lied and lied and lied and said his troops were not in Crimea, Donbass, or Luhansk, then boasted that they were in Crimea, but maintained until just 3 months ago that no Russian soldiers in Luhansk and Donbass. So no matter how huge the mountain of absolutely indisputable evidence, he will tell the most bare-faced lies. So never trust a single word from him. And then he has the temerity to say the West is an empire of lies. So let's get back to the Soviet Union. They had this big ceremony in Red Square for the young pioneers. I said the youth wing of the Communist Party of Russia. Not that it's the governing party, but they're very pro-Kremlin. So, you know, he used communism, but without the social justice message, without the decent public services. So it's all deeply dispiriting. And I feel very sorry for lots of good Russians, and there are many of them, but they can be bamboozled. I mean, anyone's mind can be warped. If you are ceaselessly bombarded with propaganda, it's very difficult to resist that. People inwardly digest that, and it takes over their mind. They internalize this narrative from Putin. Thank you so much for watching my video. So please donate to me on PayPal, georgecallahan79@gmail.com. Bye.